SS, and so I ask you to give your attention to Everette Bacon.
Thank you, Barbara. And don't worry, Barbara. I used to teach 7th grade music, so I can talk over kids. I have no problem doing that. They didn't listen to me then. They probably won't listen to me now. So you know, I was just talking to Amy, and I was asking her, and Carlos, don't hold this against me, but I was asking her, where's Greg and Stacy? Because I remember we had them come out to a Utah convention, and I was really glad to see them. They're a really neat couple. And so Carlos, you give Greg a hard time for me, and tell him, you know, I wish I would have seen him, okay? Yeah, they're a very great couple. I hope they get more involved in the affiliate. It's a real pleasure to be here in Nebraska. This whole convention's been a lot of fun. You have a really spirited, fun, loving community of members here in Nebraska. It's apparent all the time. It's apparent in everything you do. It seems like you're all good friends, and it seems like maybe you haven't seen each other for a while, but when you get back together, you're all just one big happy family again. So I'm proud to see that. And I think, yeah, you should definitely applaud yourself because it's something to be proud of. Again, I want to say that President Riccobono wished he could be here, and he sends his regards to all of you. I'm sure he'll be back here sometime soon in the near future. Maybe he'll come to your 50th next year. Who knows? So I know he has to go to the dirty Gopher state. We're not going to call them Golden Gophers. We're just going to call them Dirty Gophers. But he has to go there next year because they're doing their 100th. So I know that much. But hopefully that won't be the same weekend, and it'll be good to go. Okay. Well, so I prepared a little speech for you, and I hope you like it. When sighted people look at us, what do they see? What do you think they think? They see the cane or the dog or the guide, and they know that we're blind, right? But what do you think they really think? Some, probably more of the bleeding heart liberals, think, oh, that's so sad. Maybe I can help that poor blind person. And then some on the alt-right conservative side, they probably think, ugh, hope he doesn't touch me and I catch the blindness. But, you know, I think 99% of people think, I'm glad that's not me. Because most people, and probably some of you here, think of blindness as something you don't want. An albatross that hangs around your neck as something you have to carry as a burden. I know I'm being silly by asking, how many of you know the rhyme of The Ancient Mariner by the noted poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge? Good. I'm certain you could quote it by heart, right, Carlos? Kidding, of course, because, you know, it's a classic, but it's one of the longest poems ever written. And I know I wouldn't be excited to read a very, very long poem about a sailor written in the year 1797. But we get that term, an albatross around your neck, from that famous poem. So in it, the mariner is on a ship, and he decides that he sees an albatross in the air, and he decides he's going to shoot it. But lo and behold, the crew was following that albatross. They were using that albatross as a guide on the sea. So when the crew finds out that the albatross was shot by the mariner, they get really mad. And they fish the albatross out of the sea, and they put it around the mariner's neck as punishment. Now, during the long journey, every one of the crew gets sick, and so the mariner has to watch all of them die until he's the only one left alive. Now, this too is punishment from the gods for the killing of the innocent albatross. Now, eventually, the mariner does make it back to land, but his penance and his punishment for shooting the albatross, he's driven by guilt, and he's forced to wander the earth, telling his story over and over and over again, and basically teaching a lesson to all he meets. Now, if you think about it, and what's interesting to me, over the years, human folklore has made the albatross the bad thing. We think of an albatross around your neck as a burden we're forced to bear. But that was never the case. The albatross, that was never the bad thing about the story. The thing that caused the mariner his hardship was how he treated the poor albatross. Now, a lot of people, and I know many of us here, think that blindness is our albatross, our lot in life. So my question to all of you is, how are you going to wear your albatross? Now, all of you here recognize that you are blind or have low vision, and I use the term low vision because I really don't care for the term visually impaired. I don't think I'm visually impaired. I have no problem with the term visually impaired if other people use it. I just never liked it myself because I don't think of myself as impaired. I'm blind. I used to have low vision. I had actually partial high vision, if you want to think about it, and I'll be telling you a lot about that. But now I'm basically totally blind. I have some light perception, and I basically see. I don't know. Do any of you remember the movie Poltergeist? Okay, you remember when Carrie Ann was staring at the TV? That's what I see, is the TV all the time. That's what it looks like anyway. The more I think about it, I really can't make out anything else. So, but all of you here, you are blind or low vision, or maybe you're related to a person who has blind or low vision. You're married, or your mom or dad or your child, or maybe you work in the field of blindness and low vision. And I also use the term low vision because many people don't recognize themselves as blind. They don't like to use that term blind. It sounds kind of bad, and so they don't use it. And one of the reasons is if you think about it, according to Webster's dictionary, the word blind has several meanings. The first one we all know, sightless, obviously. The second one's interesting, lacking discernment, unable or unwilling to understand or judge, blind fault is what they call it. 3, made without reason or discrimination as a blind choice. 4, apart from intelligent direction or control as blind chance. 5, this one's my favorite, insensible as a blind stupor, hence drunk. And 6, this one's even better, made without intelligence, guidance, or judgment as a blind purchase. Now, after you read those definitions, I think that many of us are blind in a multitude of ways, don't you think? Now, all kidding aside, it is certainly understandable that after hearing the definition, one might decide that they prefer not to be called blind. That was certainly and was definitely the case for me growing up through the first quarter or so of my life. Probably about the first 35 years of my life. I grew up with hereditary blindness. My great-grandmother, she was blind. She was the first ever person to run a vending stand at the Oklahoma courthouse in Oklahoma City. She used a dog guide for all of her adult life. I always remember her with a dog guide. She also raised and maintained chickens. She had a big chicken coop that I had to help clean sometimes. And she was really proud to say that she outlived 6 husbands. I know, something, huh? She had a brother who was also blind. I never met him. He had a blind son that I knew only a little bit, but he was my great uncle. He was a farmer in Oklahoma. An interesting story about him is he used to drive a tractor, and he had lost most of his vision by the time he turned 40. He was still a farmer. This is when I met him. And so, of course, I had to ask him, so how did you farm? Like, what did you do? And he said, well, I drive a tractor like any other farmer does. And I go, okay, wait a second here. You're blind. How do you drive a tractor? And he said, well, I know my area. I know what I'm supposed to do. Okay, I said, but I know you got to put the tractor away at some point, right? And you got to get on the road, right? And put the tractor back in the barn or wherever. And he goes, oh yeah, everybody just knows to be off the road when I'm going to be on the road. Small town Oklahoma, right outside of Ardmore. What are you going to do? So it was a pretty funny story. My grandmother, she was also blind, and in Oklahoma, she was a USO volunteer, and she met my grandfather while he was serving in the Navy in World War II. Now, don't ask me how a Navy person gets stationed in Oklahoma, which doesn't have much ocean, but I guess they do have a naval base there. They did back in the 1940s when they were meeting each other. The funny thing is, they met each other. It was kind of interesting. They were walking down downtown Oklahoma City. My grandmother was striking because she had red hair, and it was fiery red. And so my grandfather saw her, and he goes, hubba hubba, Red. And she said, hubba hubba yourself. And she didn't see him or anything. She just said it right back because that's just how she was. So after that, they got married in just 2 weeks after that. It was pretty amazing. And they were married for well over 50 years. They both died at the same time in 2010. It was pretty amazing. But my grandfather, after the military, he went to the Southwest Theological Seminary, and he became ordained as a Free Will Baptist preacher. So my grandmother, she understood that her role was going to be the matriarch of any church that he pastored throughout Texas and in California. And the interesting thing is my grandmother, she used her blindness as a way to break down people's guards. This allowed her to relate critical information about church members to my grandfather. It worked out pretty well. Now, they gave birth to 2 daughters, and both of them were blind. My mom, she had a lot more vision than my aunt. My aunt went completely blind pretty much right at birth, and my mom didn't go completely blind till she was in her 40s. My aunt, she graduated from the University of California, and she became a rehabilitation professional. She's worked in both vocational rehabilitation and in independent living. She was on the Silk Committee for many years in California. She's still currently, she's in her 70s, and she runs a nonprofit for disabled people trying to find affordable housing. She was recently recognized by the former Governor Jerry Brown for the success of this organization and her long-term service to blind people. It was disabled people in general trying to find housing. So she's a pretty awesome lady. My mom, she also worked with my aunt part-time until we moved to Texas, and my mom was also a very proud homemaker. My dad was in the Navy in California for a number of years when my parents met, and then they both had 2 boys, one blind, me, and one sighted son. And then my aunt that I mentioned, she also had 2 daughters, one blind and one sighted. And my cousin who's blind, she's gave birth to 3 daughters, 2 of them who are blind. So now I tell you my family history in blindness. I'm not ashamed of who and where I come from. blindness was such a part of my existence that I really don't think I could ever understand what life would be like without it. I just never thought I'd be a blind person. I had a lot more vision than all of them growing up. I had pretty darn good vision, 20/60 straight ahead. I didn't have much peripheral because I have what's called cone rod dystrophy. So, basically that mirrors retinitis pigmentosa, so the tunnel starts to close at some point. And I had a pretty good tunnel for a long time, and I could see pretty far. And so it was kind of interesting, so I could fake it. I never knew about the NFB. My family, they knew about organizations of the blind, but they never got involved in anything about them. I was never told that I could not be successful as a blind person, but I was told that by doctors, and my mom thought that I would maintain my vision for most of my life. I would never be like everybody else, so that's what I was told. And I was told, never accept it. Never think about that. Hold on to whatever vision you have for as long as you can and learn ways around it. So those reason I never learned Braille or used a cane as a young adult or child. Alternative techniques were reserved to figuring out how to see it with my limited vision. I went to school with my cousin, because we're both the same age. She's actually 1 year younger, and we went to the same school in California. And I watched her. My cousin was pretty much totally blind from birth, and here I am. I had 20/60 vision straight ahead, so I could fake it. You never knew that I didn't see. Me, once in a while, I'd stumble over something. I couldn't see a baseball traveling very, very fast or something like that. But other than that, I could make you believe that I could see like anybody else. Many of us get good at that, don't we? Yeah, and so I saw the way kids treated my cousin. I didn't like it, but I was a kid. I didn't know what to do or how to handle it. I felt bad for her. But what it really reinforced, to see her and my mom and my grandmother and my aunt, all of these blind role models in my life, while they were great at managing their home, doing the things that they needed to do, not one of them ever used a cane to travel. My great-grandmother was the only one that ever had a dog guide, but none of my mom or grandmother or aunt, they didn't have a dog guide. They didn't use a cane. I remember my grandmother and aunt having a folded-up cane in their purse, but they just always relied on someone else to take them wherever they go. And my aunt, still to this day in her 70s, and I keep telling her she's going to hurt herself really bad one of these days, she still walks around the office without a cane that she works at, and she bumps into things and gets head scrapes and all kinds of things, and she never wanted to be seen with a cane. And so all of that was kind of reinforced to me all the time. You don't want to look blind. You don't want to be one of those people. You want to be like a sighted person. And that was reinforced all the time. So that's all I ever knew, and that's what I grew up believing. I met my wife in college. My family moved to Texas right after I graduated high school. I moved with them because my mom said to me, "Look, we have a tiny house in California. We're selling this tiny house for a ton of money, and we're going to move to Texas, and we're going to have a huge house because your dad has a good job, and we're able to make a ton of money on the sale of our house, and Texas houses are cheap. So we got a big house." And she says, "I promise you'll get a new TV and a new VCR, and you'll have your own room. I'll buy you a waterbed. Whatever you want, you can have if you'll just move with us." So I decided, why not? I can go to college in Texas. And so we ended up in Texas, and I'm going to college there. I'm an entertainer at heart, so I sang a lot growing up and did musical theater. I was a better actor than I was a singer, but I could sing a little. And I did a lot of that kind of stuff. I met my wife in college. My wife, for everything that I am as far as a goof-off and an entertainer, she's the serious one. So she always wanted to be a medical doctor from day one when I met her. She's carrying like 10 books. I don't know how she's doing it. Her shoulders got to be killing her. She's really pretty, and I said, I'm going to ask her out. And I asked her out, and I asked her, do you want to go to a musical with me? And she goes, I don't like musicals. Well, I got offended because I loved musicals. And so I basically just badgered her till she finally said, okay, I'll go. And we've been separated for 24 years, so we've been together ever since. But when in college, I actually graduated before her, and I went to work for the university. I still had really good vision. I was using some magnifiers to help magnify things that I needed to see, but most everything I could see pretty well. Now, my vision had gotten a little worse by then, but nothing to where it was very, very significant. And, I could adapt. Sighted people who are losing vision slowly, we're adapting all the time to make sure you don't know that we're losing any vision. So that's what I was doing. And I still didn't believe that I was ever going to go totally blind. I still thought I'd have plenty of vision for many years and never gave that another thought. So my wife graduates. I'm working for the university. My wife graduates, and she wants to do a couple of years of research before she goes to medical school. So she decides to work with a geneticist who happens to be a retinal specialist. And she convinces me and my family that we should go do a study about our family from this retinal specialist. So we do. And my wife looks into our history. She gets to see the stuff behind the scenes in the laboratory and all of that. And she's like, because she believed me to this point. She really didn't know either that I would lose all my vision. And she sees, when the genetics, and she sees the facts, that I'm going to go totally blind. And she's like, Everett, you're in denial. You're going to go totally blind. You got to deal with this. I'm not going to be married to someone who's going to be helpless. So I kind of listened to her, kind of didn't, and did whatever I still did. I went to work for Blockbuster Video. I found out that I taught 7th grade music for a year. I couldn't stand it. I didn't like teaching. I liked performing, but I didn't like teaching. And so Blockbuster Video had a program where if you go to work for them and you have a bachelor's degree, you can get your own store after 3 months of training. And I thought, how cool is this? I'm around entertainment all the time, movies and everything. That sounds like a blast. And so I did that. I got my own store. I did really well. Ended up as a training store manager in Dallas, Texas, had 10 stores under me. My wife got accepted to medical school at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, so we had to move to Houston. I was able to transfer down to Houston. But this was in the early 2000s, and when we moved to Houston, and things were changing. I wasn't seeing what I could see anymore. And I was noticing that the red light or the green light across the street, I couldn't tell. I couldn't see the don't walk or the walk sign anymore. And I was struggling to see the cars coming. And I was a little scared. I was getting nervous. And my wife convinced me that, well, why don't you just carry the cane? I know you don't want to use it, but just carry it. So, at least so if they hit you, they know you're blind. I guess. That's kind of the way I thought of it. But I started to carry the cane. I noticed in my Blockbuster store that I was working at that my inventory sheets and the computer screen were getting very, very hard to see. I had to put my face as close as I possibly could to the monitor, and I still wasn't seeing things. So I did some research. I did know about rehabilitation, but I didn't think I needed that. So I did some research online, and I knew about a program called Zoom Text, which could magnify the computer. And I thought, well, I could get one of those brand new fancy video magnifiers, and I could get this Zoom text software, and I could manage my store for who knows how long, right? I thought, and Blockbuster, they're going to go for this. They're going to think that's great. So 2003, I had just been awarded for Best Store Manager of the Year in 2003. That year, it was the fall season, November of 2003. So I'm flying high, and I think this is the best time to ask Blockbuster for this equipment. I could just tell them this is what I need as an accommodation, and they'll buy it from me. They just gave me an award, for God's sake. So I wrote up a memo and gave it to my district manager and my human resources manager. January 2004 rolls along, and I get called into the regional manager's office, who is above all of those. He has a videotape on his desk that he never showed me or anything, but he says, "We're going to let you go. We think that you've altered your inventory records in your store." They never showed me anything that I did. He said, "It's on this videotape." And I said, "Why don't you show me the tape? Because I knew I did nothing wrong." And he said, "We're not going to show you the tape. We don't have to. Texas is an at-will state, just like Nebraska." And they let me go. And in their mind, they're a big, giant company at the time. Blockbuster was huge, if you remember back then. Not so huge now. But at that time, they were huge. And they let me go. And I was devastated. I was really hurt. I'd worked for them for almost 10 years. I could never imagined anything like that could happen to me. I was really depressed, but my wife and my mom, they were angry, and so they decided that they are going to email out a bunch of emails telling people how terrible Blockbuster is, that they discriminate against blind people, that they are an awful company, and that my whole story. And they email it out, and one of the emails gets forwarded to one Scott LaBar. You're clapping because many of you know that Scott LaBar is a main attorney for the National Federation of the Blind. Again, I'd heard of the NFB but didn't know anything about him. And Scott LaBar, he reaches out to me, and he wants to hear my story, and I tell him everything. And he says, I think I'm going to represent you, and I'm going to tell the National Federation of the Blind about your story. And he said, all that I'm going to ask in return, if we win, I'm going to ask for my fees that I normally get as an attorney. Nothing more than that, though. He didn't ask for a lot extra. He said, and if we win or they settle or anything like that, you'll get a nice payout. And all I'm going to ask is that you look into this National Federation of the Blind and you see if this is something that interests you. And I thought, of all things, he doesn't know me. The National Federation of the Blind, they don't know me. And I thought, and they're willing to, stake me and represent me, and they don't know anything about me. And I just thought that was amazing. And so we ended up settling out of court with Blockbuster. I was given a nice settlement, and Scott LaBar was paid off. And a year later, my wife graduated medical school and was recruited to the University of Utah to do her residency. And so we moved to Utah. And I said, the first thing I'm going to do is, I don't know anybody in Utah, so I'm going to check out this NFB and see what I can do. And I met Ron Gardner. I met Ray Martin, Norm Gardner, Carl Smith, Nick Schmidt-Roth, Milt Taylor, Ty Tomasi, Kristen Cox, Sherilyn Creer, on and on and on of outstanding NFB members. And I got to hear their stories. And I got invited to the next national convention. And I got to be around so many blind people that were living the life that they wanted. They were independent. They were traveling by themselves. They weren't relying or waiting for someone else to help them. It was blindness like I had never seen. I did not know that blind people were this independent, living the way they want, happy, in control of their lives, like raising families, buying homes, doing whatever job they wanted to do. And all I knew is that I wanted to be one of them. Instead of wanting to hide from them, I wanted to be one of them. And what's funny to think about, in a weird way back when, my wife is the one that kind of led me to the NFB because she's the worst one to tell me that I was in denial. If you think about it, if I could have found the NFB as a child or an impressionable teenager, I wonder how different I might be today. My family, they did not realize or understand the important work of the NFB. They never learned how the NFB was working to change the social definition of blindness. It wasn't that my family taught me bad habits or taught me to feel sorry for myself. That was certainly never the case. But my family, they never thought of blindness as an albatross. And that is why conventions like this one are so very important. And that is why the National Federation of the Blind of Nebraska affiliate, local chapters, divisions, and the affiliate is so important. Because you know why? We are the ones that can tell people that the albatross around their necks is not something that needs to weigh them down, but something that can be used to help others. We must, as blind people, continue this important work that's been going on for 75, almost 80 years. We must continue to advocate and organize. It is our duty to change the social stigma attached to being blind. So more people aren't raised like me thinking that I don't want to be one of those. Rather, hey, blind people, they're just normal people like anybody else. So what that they're blind? That's what we want to change, and that's what we want to create. So I ask you tonight, again, how will you wear your albatross? Will you wear it as some sort of something to feel sorry for you? Or will you lug it around and let it weigh you down so that it consumes you? Or would you wear it proudly, as if the albatross was something that makes you unique? Something like a badge of honor because you've been entrusted with showing the rest of the world how amazing the human spirit is and how strong we as blind people are in our ingenuity, our strength, our courage, and our ability to adapt. Will you wear this albatross and proudly state, with hope, love, and determination, and the relationships and the mentorship of the National Federation of the Blind, we can live the life we want? Our 1-minute message. The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day, we raise the expectations of the blind and the sighted because we realize that low expectations create barriers between us and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back. Now, I'm going to leave you with one last thing. It's one of my favorite quotes. I said this when I was nominated to the board of directors, and it's still one of my proudest quotes that I like to quote. It's from Cesar Chavez, who was a civil rights activist. Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. So come, be active in your local chapter meetings. Help strengthen a division. Join this movement, for we are the blind, and our social change will not be stopped. Thank you.